Towards the beginning of this One Chart at a Time video series, Nigel Holmes talked about using icons and isotype charts to compare categories in your data. Well, on today's episode of the series, Alyssa Fowers is here from the Washington Post to talk about using icons to visualize qualitative data. And as you'll see, it's a way to maybe get away from some of the abstract shapes we often use in our data visualizations, like bars and lines and points. And I think Alyssa does a fantastic job at her work at the Post using icons in her work, so I'm really glad she was able to join us. So I'm going to hand it over to Alyssa so you can learn more about using icons in your data visualizations.
Hello, my name is Alyssa Fowers. I am a graphics reporter at the Washington Post, and I am here to talk to you today about icon charts. Icon charts use one icon, can be an image of a person, could be a geometric shape, could be lots of different things, to represent a certain number or proportion of people or anything else that you're trying to show. So unlike a bar chart, which shows sort of one length to communicate a summary number, or like a line chart that uses a position to show one number. When you're looking at icon charts, you have a bunch of different images that sort of add together to a quantity or a proportion. They are really, really great for breaking up one summary number into sort of individual, again, people, items, what have you, as a way of sort of letting the scale of things sink in, or reminding people that this number is made up of lots of individuals who are all different and all have their own lives. I find that really useful in my work. I do a lot of work about the economy, and sometimes I cover mental health or COVID deaths, places where it's really easy to let a number become sort of inhuman. So I'm going to show some icon charts that I've made in my work because I can sort of speak to the thought process behind them, and then I'll walk you through some examples of icon charts that I really like. So let me go ahead and get that started. Okay, so this is an example of an icon chart showing the number of people who said they didn't have enough to eat in the past 7 days among folks who are out of work in the late fall. So as you can see here, there are 20 figures in each row. Each one represents 5% of the total. So 1 in 20 is 5%. So if you want to look at about 12% of all Americans, that comes to 2 of these icons. 16% is 3, 25% is 5, 21% is about 4. So one of the things you might notice here is that it's really hard to do precise numbers with icon charts, especially if you're trying to show proportions. So one of the ways that I like to kind of get around that is to do exact labeling. So, for example, this was a story about the CARES Act back in the spring, showing who would actually gain sick leave from the CARES Act. As you might recall, there was no paid sick leave requirement for large companies, and sort of these very small businesses had some potential exemptions. So what I did here was have each figure represent about 100,000 workers, and then label them precisely underneath. So if you just wanted to get a sense of how many people were covered versus not covered in what kind of industries, you could just sort of scroll through and see that in some of these essential industries, like grocery stores, general merchandise, which is like a Target or a Walmart, you see these big numbers of people that are not covered by the law, and almost no one who works for a medium or small business. But if you were really interested in knowing exactly how many people there were, you have these fairly precise numeric labels underneath that sort of get to the same idea. One other thing you can do with icon charts that I personally really love doing is actually use them to make bar charts or waffle charts. So a little bit later on in the story, I look at who has sick leave and what industries or people sort of interact with others the most. And each figure represents still about 100,000 workers, but they are sort of split into the proportion that have sick leave versus don't have sick leave. Again, you see these very precise labels, but also you have all of these individual sort of human figures in there. Another very cool thing that you can do with icon charts that I really like doing is looking at what kind of details you're showing in the chart. So because I'm using one figure per person, or sorry, one figure per 100,000 people, I have all of those sort of details of those figures to play with. So for example, in this chart about the number of essential employees who are uninsured in different industries, I was actually able to match the gender balance of the icons to the gender balance of people who work in that industry. So if you look at maids and housekeeping cleaners, it's largely women, cooks, a little more male dominated. If you go down to childcare workers, almost all women. So you can get that kind of detail in with icon charts, just sort of subtly in the background by the kinds of choices that you make in which icons you're picking for what. Another fun way to do icon charts, fun is maybe the wrong word, is looking at waffle charts. So in this story, which is about people screening positive for anxiety and depression, sort of in the early pandemic, I actually turned a bunch of figures into a bunch of squares. I made a waffle chart out of it showing who were showing signs of anxiety, depression, or both. So this is really helpful because it sort of eliminates one of the potential issues with icon charts where you might have icons of different sizes because people come in different sizes. Here they're all made the same size because they're all contained inside one of these squares. As you're looking at this, you might notice that it's kind of large. It's a big chunk of space to show what's essentially 4 sentences. So that is often an issue when working with icon charts. They can be kind of large and unwieldy. So one of the ways to deal with that is to try to make sure that what you're showing is worth all of that space, and you have a really good reason for that. So in this case, I thought it was worth it because I was able to show in this case, I thought it was worth it because I was able to sort of emphasize again that these are individual people, that there are people of all ages and genders that are experiencing this. But I didn't use it throughout the whole story. That's another way to sort of get the impact of an icon chart without having to deal with using it for everything. So for instance, I used some stacked bars, sort of a map situation here. And I guess I maybe could have done these with icons, but just having that chart in the beginning that sort of introduces the humanity of these people, I think carries forward in through the rest of what you're using. So you don't have to use them for everything to get that benefit. Icon charts do have some sort of the opportunity to go in unfortunate directions. So some of the sort of most notorious bad charts are icon charts. So for example, this chart of average female height per country, I don't have an attribution for this. I just see it floating around on Twitter every so often. As you might notice here, this is covering, about 7-inch variance in height. But you have these tiny, tiny Latvian women, tiny, tiny Indian women barely coming up to the knees of the Latvian women, which does not really reflect reality. Part of this is using this truncated y-axis to sort of, while still attempting to show the entirety of a person. Another issue here is that when you try to size icons to add maybe another dimension to your data, you're not only making them taller, you're making them wider, which then means you're looking at area rather than height, and that can get into some fairly tricky territory. So I would say that when working with icon charts, one of the important things is to use them to show quantity and maybe some qualities of the people who are being represented, but not to necessarily use them to show numerical qualities of those people. Icon charts can venture pretty easily into the realm of art, and they often do. So This is a picture of the Iraq Body Count Project from Reed Parham in 2008. Each of these flags represents 5 deaths in the Iraqi war at the time of the art installation. And the red flags represent American deaths. The white flags represent Iraqi deaths. So obviously it would be pretty difficult to gain a precise estimate out of this just from looking at all these flags, but the proportionate that's shown is really sort of overwhelming. It's really difficult to miss that point. And by having, a physical object representing a certain number of people instead of, one big object, it does also sort of bring in the sense of scale there. Another sort of digital example of this is the mass shootings tracker that the Washington Post has, which looks at all the victims of mass shootings in America and has an icon for each of them. So this isn't showing really summarizing quantities at all. It's instead giving sort of a space for each victim. If you scroll over them, you'll see more details about them as well as the other people that were involved in the same incident. And as you scroll down, it just sort of goes back through time. These darker ones are young people. So this is an 18-year-old. This is a 5-year-old. I find this to be very effective, emotionally speaking, which is why my voice is breaking a little bit as I show this. So this is an example of sort of digital art / visualization that utilizes icon charts. However, you can also do this without going into sort of this artistic realm, where you are sort of showing quantities in a way that we're maybe more accustomed to. An example of this that I really like is Max Exodus, the story of the Rohingya crisis when they were leaving Myanmar as refugees. And part of what I really love about this is all the different things they do with icon charts. So it starts with the story of 15 refugees arriving by boat, and you can see an icon for each of them. Those numbers, the icons grow as the numbers grow, and sort of grows into this big crowd. But then, of course, once you have a crowd this size, you can't really see how many people are in the back of it. So they sort of change the perspective, and they turn that actually into blocks that then get built out as we go through this visualization. That grows and grows and grows. So having seen how many people, or having a sense of the number of people that are in each of those blocks, I think kind of makes the overall thing be a little bit more impactful. Then they actually make this into waffle charts, similar to some things that I've done since then, where those blocks are broken down into percentages to show what services people have received, what services people need, describing that population a little bit more, and then again going through and showing sort of a total increase and information about where they're living and so on. But at the end, it actually returns to that sort of icon chart where you're looking kind of at eye level at these people, at images of people who represent Rohingyas in this crisis. So I really like this visualization because it sort of lets you see individual people, zooms out to the mass, and then kind of returns you there after you've gotten some of that more precise information. So you may notice that many of my examples have mass in the title. That's because I think icon charts are one of the best ways to sort of communicate large-scale loss or large-scale change without losing the sense of the individuals involved. So it's a little bit of a rehumanization of data. So those are icon charts. I hope to see more of them in the wild. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks, Alyssa, for that great review of using icons in your data visualization work. There are lots of links below so that you can see Alyssa's work and other people's work using icons. I think it's a useful thing for you to consider in your own work, but as Alyssa mentioned, be careful about how you represent different people in different communities and different groups. So come back tomorrow. We're still going to be talking about ways to visualize qualitative data before we wrap up this entire series in just a few days. So come back tomorrow. I will see you then. Thanks.